because what you are going to encounter here, beyond the culture, but also within the culture, is an experience, simply an experience. During this week, many different aspects of one experience, an experience of children, teachers and parents. An experience that is 43 years old, but it is a daily experience. That means that daily experience that has the characteristic to be alive and always in evolution. Of course, it is full of problems, difficulties, discouragements, mistakes, problems again, struggles, commitment, effort, energy, hopes and dreams, and many other things. List to be continued.
And walking around Reggio Emilia today, what observations can you make about the community based on your experience, on what you experienced?
Before coming to Reggio Emilia, did you have, you may have had unanswered questions about the philosophy. Now, after spending a day in the community, do you find yourself more curious about any one thing in particular?
fact that you have come to Reggio wearing many different hats, playing many different roles: public official, teacher of teachers, and artist. So now that you're here in the city, I asked you which of your many roles predominates.
So just to build on that, I'll just quote Emilia Journey, who said, it takes time, availability and openness, many questions, fewer answers, collaboration and patience.
And I'm struck by the children having the ability to understand their common responsibility in a project, and that over time it will evolve, but the goal is not the end result. The goal is the learning process, and that in our society we think of a structure and the deadlines, and everyone has to line up perfectly because we need to be in by
We need to get it
6
done.
months later.
We need to get it there, and it will take as long as it takes.
Precisely.
Yeah, instead of, no, we have to be finished by this, or we've got to have this finished by Friday. It takes as long.
Sergio was giving an overview of the history. It was very striking that there was an understanding that things would take time, that they would be difficult, that there would be backtracking, that the whole conception of time was different from our North American.
And it wasn't goal-oriented. For example, when he spoke about utopia, it was a woman stepping away. It was the ambition of something greater. It was the ambition, but never reaching it, and being quite satisfied with just travel.
Moving toward.
The road that's being built, and the journey.
Good
The
walking.
road that's being
Yes.
built one step after another,
Right.
after another. Whereas I think a lot of, especially one catchphrase now, I know certainly in educational administration, is start with the goal and work backwards. And often I find I really left at sea with that because I don't know what the goal is. I know that we're on to something exciting and interesting, but I don't know what the goal is. I won't know what, in fact, I won't even know if there's I'll know milestones along the way in our learning, but I usually don't have an end point. But I know this is something that is common parlance in administration now.
And it's so limiting, because when you think of any project you've done, think of the evolution that takes place. As you're doing one thing, you think of another thing, and you go off on a tangent, and they come together, and they make it greater.
And how can it be collaborative if the goal is set? That the whole notion of dialogue and collaboration is lost.
Which came up again and again and
Again and again.
Dialogue,
Yes.
collaboration, we worked with each other, we worked together on this. A feeling that even if we disagreed and it became difficult for a while, that was okay, that we would still keep putting one foot in front of the other and working along toward, and maybe it's just a question of semantics. Maybe they're sort of talking about a vision of how people can be together and live a beautiful life. And maybe that's a goal. So maybe you are working always toward that goal. So maybe it's a semantic thing, but it seems like a lot of the time our goals are much more short term. We have to have a curriculum plan in place by X, because it has to go into about Bird Ed by then. And
there's also part of that is also the recognition, and this is something that none of them were afraid of saying, I don't know. I don't know if that's the final answer. I don't know if this is the only path. It's the path that we have chosen and presented as right for us. And that whole history too, that was something very marked, that long before Reggio was even thought of, there was the long history of educational reform and educational development and interest and concern in education predated the schools.
Yeah, he said the end of the 1900s, and that would be just sort of Industrial Revolution, end of Industrial Revolution times, where public education was becoming an idea. And I think it seems that this community has been involved with it since then.
Yeah, he had stated that it's not a place of health and childcare, that it's considered a responsibility of the community. The schools are a part of the community.
Yes. Yes. And just that tolerance of ambiguity.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That ambiguity.
It can be this,
Yes.
and it can be that.
Yes.
It might be part of both. We don't know. We'll have to see. And there was one little phrase in here, I can't remember who said it, but it's multifaceted. It's not two faces. So that whole sort of binary functions that we get into, this, that, good, bad, all the dualistic Cartesian things that we're slaves to. And then this little comment, education that loves silence and education that loves words. It can love both things, and even though they might seem mutually exclusive, they can exist in kind of an ambiguous relationship and be.
Bringing in the artist to this was a very significant part, and again that changeover in attitude towards what is education and what does it mean. And that also seemed to allow, like when they've now had the laboratory, the whole ray of light that has brought in people from all ages, all walks of life, from a physicist to a 18-year-old students from high school, as well as small children.
Oh, in the atelier.
In the atelier, in the ray of light, that is the first attempt that they have made to actually go beyond age 6 with children. And the very significant part for me, anyways, was that Sergio made the comment that adults, to be able to educate, had to first learn how to learn, and that they couldn't teach before they were becoming learners, like the children,
Like
and
the
that the children already knew what they needed to learn. It's the adults who don't know.
You know, and it was interesting that Sergio said that the Ray of Light Atelier, that it's really almost like, I mean, it looks like most high-end science centers I've gone into, built by parents and children and youth. He said that they'd sort of gone out on a limb going beyond their mandate, including children beyond the age of 6, and what did they say, 3 to 18 were the ages of the participants, and they did that because of North American comment and influence. So again, it's a collaboration, it's a dialogue of, you know, how can we extend it beyond 6 years of age? Why don't you extend it beyond 6 years of age? And so they did it as a response to the listening that they'd done to, you know, to
And
questions coming from away.
That's sincere, you know, that they are really, truly listening.
Let's try it. Yeah.
And they're saying, all right, this keeps coming up, so it must mean something, you know. Well, we will listen, and we will try. And they said, this is hard for us.
This is hard for us.
This is hard and difficult, but yes, we're doing this. And that until they had been invited to the festival, that they were having just sort of meandering fun with them.
Oh, and so time interfered with the
Time
because they had a
interfered,
date.
yes, they did. They got
had
a
to get
deadline.
it done.
Yeah.
And they worked, so they worked first of all with ages outside of their timeline, of their normal, you know, their normal context of ending at age 6, and then they worked with an externally imposed timeline, which is something that they weren't accustomed to either. And it's sort of an interesting irony that they were working with people up to 18 years of age because of a North American dialogue. And then it ended up somehow having a timeline in it. I mean, I think that's kind of perfect irony, isn't it? Yes.
And then the space that they were given when they did go, and they had to transform the space somehow so that they could even work within it.
Right.
It was a very traditional,
It was a lovely,
shiny space, as I said, very, very orderly and unapproachable, you know, and they had to
turn it into
Turn
kind
it
of a mad
into-
scientist lab. Yeah.
And that too was interesting.
And the involvement of the parents. Yes, he referred to it as the room in Genoa was shiny, so they changed the room. Genoa, teachers, children, and the room lost its identity. And in terms of, just wait to build on when he was talking about having to educate the adults, first give the adults the opportunity to play with materials and investigate things and explore, because as Sergio said, children always know what they want to look for, not what they want to do,
Right.
but what they want to look for. Oh, I want to look for what happens when I put that mirror farther down in the water. Adults don't. thought that perhaps if each of us came up with a metaphor that could, that some of our interpretation could sort of coalesce around about, it would give us another way of talking about it.
I thought of piazza, the whole idea of centrality, and that the three words that they did give us were centrality, transparency, and circularity. So I think of those not only in terms of architecture, but also in metaphorical terms. And this whole city of Reggio Emilia is built around the notion of the meeting place of the piazza. And the schools are built upon the notion that that we each have a space, but that there is fluidity within the space. And the piazza is the meeting place, and that there are, again, they emphasize today the notion that there are two teachers in every class, they refused isolation, that's how they put it, refused isolation.
Yes.
Which I really thought, yes, that's the thing about teaching in North America, that we teach in isolation. So this is the whole idea of teachers working better in dialogue with one another in all cases, and listening and observing and documenting, always in relationship, in conversation with other people, and that they do each of the four levels of children, four little groups, had their own space, but they also were encouraged to move and flow
In their public space.
In their public space, and that they have an identity of their own. Over and over again, we heard today that the history of Reggio, that they are grounded in their history and in their unique character, and that the schools are what they are because of the history of Reggio Emilia,
and because of the history of the school itself, and that's why each school has a unique identity.
Yes.
They're not Reggio School, Reggio School, Reggio School.
No, every school developed and grew. The school we saw today was a typical 1970s structure that had to be modified from where they started, with the 1970s building, and so they had to open it up, they had to create some kind of piazza within the school, some kind of central core, which didn't exist. And so all of the fluidity of the school, the bright nooks and crannies that they had to be opened up with glass and with hallways and with throughways and mirrors and with lighting and with access to the outdoors, that they had to gradually change. And they told us today it was ever developing and ever changing. So inviting people into that core, including the parents, the children, the neighborhood even, and
The ongoing identity was being created by children and parents and teachers, always.
always in
The
conversation.
identity is
Yes.
always being moved on because it's a title. Yeah, it was really clear. It was clearer visiting the school than it was
Oh,
talking about it or reading about it.
And again, bringing together more and more. We were trying to think of ways that, in presenting this, that the theory and practice could be brought closer together.
So to continue with the idea of metaphor and selecting a metaphor that you think starts to talk about the things that you're observing about the Reggio approach and about its possible interpretation in other settings. And I think you've come up with a metaphor that
I've chosen voice as my metaphor because we need to view the child as competent, and in order to view them as competent, we have to understand the connection between the voice of the child, the voice of the adult, the voice of the educator, and the many voices of the child through the 100 languages. And although there are...
So you're talking not just about voice in a physical voice sense. You're
Right.
talking about a much larger thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Than vocalization, for instance.
Absolutely. There are many ways of expressing oneself, and every child is competent in one way or another, and their ability to to do that, for example, the individuals that have come here to Reggio are searching, whatever their motivation, they have valuable insight to offer, since they've identified the need for change. And if they can hear the child through whatever language it is that they use, then they've achieved it. But I also think that voice is important because all we can do with this information we've learned is share it with our voice very carefully. Maybe not our voice, but our expressions, our mannerisms, our behavior, and pass it
Our
on to
behavior
others.
in a greater sense.
Right.
Yeah. We're not in a sense of selling it.
Exactly.
In a sense of trying to live it and make it authentic to starting with yourself and then working out.
Yes, because I think we can share this idea, but more importantly, we have to listen.
Yes.
Once we've shared the idea, we have to listen to the children, and we have to listen to the people around us, and from there we can build a program. And whatever that program is, it will exist within the environment that we come from, because to take this incredible environment and transplant it is not...
Well, this is not our history.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in order to create, we could go on and on about the differences in our environments.
Which is where
Interestingly,
that's where we started, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Trying to
noting all the
dissect it
differences and could we do this or could we do that?
And why?
Yeah.
Why do they have this and why don't we? And
Yeah.
why? And once you start connecting all that and you realize it's because that's who they are.
Yes.
It's not who we are.
No.
And it's
Yeah.
wonderful that we can learn from them and also teach our children that they are not the center of the universe, but they are a very, very important part of the world.
And they're
And
competent and able to contribute in many ways.
yes.
Yeah.
And so basically, I think share through our voices, our many voices, and then listen. Listen and understand how to interpret their voice, whatever that voice might be. And that's educators, children, administrators, whoever it might be, all the people that come to the table, being able to understand that. What metaphor have you chosen for today?
Well, it's interesting that when you were beginning to talk about voice, you said thread. And thread is the metaphor that I've been working with in my mind as I'm sorting through all of this. And thread is something that comes up fairly often for me for a variety of reasons. But thread is, and it came up in not today's, but yesterday's, and I can't remember who was speaking, but she was talking about the thread that ran through things. Now, one thread that I'm thinking of is the remarkable thread of history that runs through this community. That is, it seems to be, it's revisited in every environment. It's revisited in language. It's revisited, like every day that we've been here, we have had some contact with history, with the history of this place and that thread. Thread also is, it's a flexible thing. It could be linear, but it could go like this, it could be in a great big tangle, it could be woven, it could be used to tie things, it could be used to bind things together, it could be used to separate things by tying them apart. And so if I think of a thread as being a unifying metaphor because of its flexibility, it helps me think about the kinds of things that have been happening in the days that we've had in Reggio Emilia. When I start to think about how to interpret some of this, some of these experiences in our own context, in our own setting, I'm thinking about what threads do we have to start making our unique kind of braid or our unique web or our unique, how do we find the voice in our own setting and make a unique entity, because we are a unique entity, but interpreting the principles of wholeness and circularity and transparency and what was the other one? I just forgot. It went out of my head. Centrality. Yes, yes, having a core, and all those words are so. As Deanna said, they're about a physical environment, but they're very big words because they're about They're really at the heart of this business. The pedagogista at Sole, when they were talking about the paint in the room, said it was part of their chromatic landscape. And, oh, I just love that. I love that whole idea, the fact that we are creating a landscape even in our interior environments, the chromatic landscape. And then, this is a whole other thing, but I really started to think about too, the environment as having a communication code. The environment is communicating with you all the time. And I think living in an environment such as this with a rich history, you're aware daily that this is your communication code. It's communicating to you all the time. Your environment has a huge voice. And we don't credit our environments with we don't credit them with their voice, no. And I think we're a little bit careless in the kinds of environments we create because we haven't credited the environments with as large a voice as they